Welcome to the Playing Hooky podcast with your hosts Rachel and Nathan, brought to you by UtilityMuffinLabs.com. Consistently rated adequate. Welcome to another Playing Hooky podcast. I'm Nathan.
I'm Rachel.
And I just like to barge in. And today we got a light.
Yay!
So for those of you who are listening on the podcast, you probably have no idea what we're talking about.
Who cares? A light.
Yeah, so we record this too, and then I'll edit it and put it on YouTube. But we got a light, and it's bright, and it's a little ridiculous right in my face.
It's very bright. It's all up in my glasses.
But hopefully the video looks a little bit better.
Yeah.
And, very soon we'll get
Who cares?
Additional lighting,
right.
And it'll look better and better.
Yeah, we can only improve from here.
Mm-hmm.
It's life is fun and hard, and you just got to keep trying to improve yourself.
Yeah.
That's the message. That's today's message. I don't know what today's message is. What are we talking about today on the podcast, Nathan Seaver?
We are talking about Blade Runner.
Yeah.
And we are talking about Star Trek Generations.
That is correct, sir. The first Star Trek movie with the Next Generation crew. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the historical significance of that movie, how that movie even came about. Tell me, please.
Okay, so I don't think I know a ton about the whole happenings of Hollywood and Star Trek.
I don't care about that. I care about you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my history.
Your significance. Your history.
Okay,
yeah.
So
just so people know, I don't care about the actual history. I care about your history.
Okay.
Because that's the point of this podcast.
Right. All right. Very good. So I was 10 years old in 1994. You do the math. Anyway, I was 10 years old in 1994, and that was the year that Star Trek The Next Generation had its final season. And
wait, 94 was the last year they had their season, like the last time it was on TV?
I believe so.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
What did you think?
I just thought it was on forever. Really.
I mean, it was on in reruns for a long time. Now you're making me second guess myself.
No,
I don't know. Let me talk and you look it up and double check it. Look it up and double check me. But I'm relatively certain that it went off the air in 1994 because that's when this movie came out.
I just didn't.
So yeah, I'm pretty sure that Star Trek: The Next Generation went off the air in 94. Anyway, I was 10 years old, and if you've listened to our earlier podcasts where Nate watched a couple episodes of Star Trek: The Original Series and Star Trek: The Next Generation, you might remember that not only am I a big Trekkie, but the reason I'm a big Trekkie isn't so much because I am a huge lover of sci-fi. It's mostly, was it 94?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was right.
Spot on.
I was right.
87 to 94.
I know.
I just thought it was later than that for some reason. I
No.
realized it came out in the 80s.
Yeah, it came out 87, and the first couple seasons are very, 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 late 80s looking. And I think the season, I think it's season 3 or season 4 is really where it took off and it got really good. So that would have been around 1990, which was probably when I first started watching it. I was 5, 6, 7 years old, somewhere in there. And, if you've watched or I've listened, you haven't watched it, but if you've listened to older episodes of the podcast, you may remember that Star Trek means a lot to me because, not just because I like sci-fi, but because it came about in a pivotal part of my life. My mom was going through a divorce from my stepdad, and it just meant a lot to me to have Star Trek in my life. It was just something that hit at just the right point in my life, and as a little kid, a little girl going through that, I'd just been diagnosed with dyslexia, so school wasn't really a place I could, take refuge in, but I always had the Enterprise crew, and so they meant a lot to me, and so I saw Captain Picard and Riker and Data and Geordi and Dr. Crusher, and, Deanna Troi. I saw the whole crew, the whole bridge crew, Worf, everybody, even Tasha Yar when she showed up every now and then. I saw the whole bridge crew as almost like an imaginary extended family, and so as a little kid, being a latchkey kid very much for the most part, using my imagination, sometimes I would pretend and imagine what it would be like to go to Starfleet Academy or what it would be like to be on the bridge of the Enterprise as an ensign. And it meant a lot to me, and it was just a little crushing when it went off the air because even though it was just a TV show, in some ways it was like a part of my family was going away. I felt like the bridge crew of the Enterprise was a family, and to some extent, a little bit, it did feel like, this family that I got to see every week and then in reruns in the summers was going away. So it was a huge deal when this movie came out shortly after the end of the series. And I believe that they were working on the movie the last season of The Next Generation. It was a huge deal for me when this came out. So this is how big of a dork I was. I had a jean jacket, and I had one pin on this jean jacket, and it was a communicator from The Next Generation.
Nice.
It was a communicator from The Next Generation, and I remember going to the theater with my mom, opening weekend, trying to get the best seat I could for my short little body so I could see, and just like wearing my little jean jacket with so much pride. And she took me to go see it, and there was like a bunch of nerds there, and it's like mostly like older dorky guys, but there were some kids there. And at this time in like mid 90s, the Star Trek was as popular as it was ever going to be in our generation. And when I say that, I mean, like, if you go to like a Target now, if you have kids now, and you go down the toy aisle, I don't know what's there now, but I know it was there in the late 90s, and it wasn't Star Trek figurines. But in the early and mid 90s, it was overrun with Star Trek figurines. I mean, every action figure you can imagine was Star Trek, Star Trek, Star Trek, Star Trek.
Yeah, they really try to like push those.
They did.
Toys, yeah.
And I took it with me. I carried it in my little inside pocket of my jean jacket. I had my favorite action figure was a 12-inch Data, fully opposable Data action figure with like a cloth uniform. I still have it in a box that's in the closet. Right. And I had it with me. I had my little Data action figure in my jean jacket. Because like, I don't know why, I just thought, if I brought this toy with me, somehow it gave me like more cred. It just made the experience like more real somehow. Like I was bringing a piece of home with me. So there I was, little nerdy Rachel in her jean jacket and her communicator on her breast, and like my little Data toy, and I'm not gonna call him a doll, it was an action figure, Data action figure in my pocket, and I was so excited. And when we sat down to watch the movie together, I can still remember those feelings of the opening scenes, of how excited I was. And the first couple scenes, it ties the old or original series crew kind of in with the new crew. Mm-hmm. And it was very exciting. It's very cool. I'm not sure if anyone has any inclination to see it, but, I'm not going to spoil it because we're not going to get into the whole movie, but we can give spoilers.
Well, there are some things I do want to discuss.
Okay, well, yeah, we'll definitely discuss it. So the first opening scene, spoilers are ahead. So the first scene, you've got Captain Kirk and Scotty and Chekhov are there to send off the new Enterprise, which is, I think, the Enterprise B.
So I want to ask you some questions just about that opening scene.
Yeah.
Is there any particular reason why, like, those are the only three? Like, from a story perspective, or was it kind of just like...
It could have been. I don't think from a story perspective there's, like, an incredibly good reason. I think it probably had to do with contract negotiations, to be honest. I think at that time, DeForest Kelley, the gentleman who played Bones, Dr. McCoy, had passed away, so he may not have been alive then. He was in one episode of The Next Generation, but he was a bit older than the rest of the cast, and so I think he had passed away at that point. Leonard Nimoy was still around, and he had even been in a couple episodes of The Next Generation playing himself, playing Spock. I don't think that there was like a good story reason there, or a canon reason only to have those three. But anyway, when that scene came on and we were watching it together, I could, those feelings, those memories of being excited came back, and I was not as attached to the original series crew as I was the Next Generation crew, but I was so excited in the theater as a little kid watching that opening scene because I felt like I was part of something really special, of like Star Trek history, where you had the old crew and the new crew coming together in one movie. But I couldn't wait, even though I knew that like the first chunk of this was going to be important. I couldn't wait for that first scene to be over because I knew what came after that. I knew all my old friends came after that first scene. I knew I was going to get to see Picard and Worf and Geordi again, and I didn't know in what way, but I knew that this movie was about them and for them. So there was like that anticipation of like, okay, this is awesome, but let's get to the to the Next Generation crew. It just hit me again, and I don't know if you happened to. I'm sure I had like a big smile on my face because I love the first 15 minutes of that movie because it's so exciting. It brings back so many great memories.
So I don't know. I was actually just watching the movie. Like I wasn't really. No offense, but I wasn't really.
No, that's okay. It's not all about me, as it turns out. I wasn't
really paying attention to you. But what I can say is that, So I'm not like a big Star Trek fan. You know, you knew that. That's kind of part of the reason why this podcast even was created. It was kind of like, oh, you're so into this, and I've not had a lot of experience with it. But interestingly enough, watching this movie and like watching it from the start, like I kind of fell into it like an old friend. Like I know these characters. Like even though I don't have a lot of like intentional exposure to Star Trek and any of its incarnations, like I've still seen enough Star Trek to be familiar. I've seen enough of the original series. I've seen enough of the Star Trek movies. So like honestly, I kind of have seen a lot of Star Trek, even though it wasn't something that I was like really necessarily seeking out. Like it's just so culturally ubiquitous that like I do know these characters, and even if I don't know them to the degree that you know them, like I still was like, oh wow, this is really cool. Like
Yeah.
you know,
I had a similar experience when I went and saw the new Star Wars movies. Like the not the most recent one, but I'm not a Star Wars person. But when I saw the one that came out about 3 years ago, that kind of reintroduced like the new generation of Star Wars folks, but it had like that very snippet of Luke Skywalker at the end, and had Han Solo and Leia in there. I had a similar experience where it's like, these aren't my characters, but it did feel like falling into something that was like, oh, and this is the, like, I knew the road we were going down. I felt very comfortable in that so that world.
It was actually very easy to get into this movie and to appreciate it because, like, even though I wasn't super familiar with these characters, much like you were saying with Star Wars, like, I kind of already knew them.
Right.
You know, I kind of already know Captain Kirk. I know Captain Picard, and you know, I know Data. So I know these characters. You know, I've watched 20 or 30 episodes of The Next Generation, like, just because it was on TV.
It was on TV for a long time, and it was always on in reruns.
Well, and I think that's part of the reason why it didn't occur to me that it was, by 94, it was canceled, because I was probably watching it in reruns for years, because, like, locally on the television, you know, they're like, every city has a station that just, like, plays syndicated television, and you know, Star Trek: The Next Generation was on until like late 90s.
Well, I moved around a lot as a kid, and I feel like every city we lived in, there was a local Fox or CBS station, because it's owned by Paramount, which owns CBS. So there was always a Fox or a CBS station that would have reruns on after school or one night a week or on the weekends.
Was like Channel 50.
Yeah, something like that.
Chicago.
I think ours.
PWR, Channel 50.
Oh, nice.
I remember stupid shit like that.
No, but it's like ingrained in you because it's like, you've heard it 1,000 times when you were a kid.
The Empire commercial. Do you remember did you live geographically in an area where they had Empire carpet?
Empire, that one?
588-2300. There's no reason I should remember a carpet store's phone number, but I will remember it forever. Also, ironically, carpet, like, have you ever heard of Luna Carpet?
No.
They do one too, and there's a 773-202-2222 Luna. These are things you don't need. But yeah, so carpet companies, I'm your guy. I know their numbers.
You get the jingles.
So watching this movie was very much like jumping into a plot or a story that I kind of already knew. I was a little hesitant though, because I was like, oh, this is like a time travel movie, and kind of it is, but kind of it isn't, right?
Yeah.
It's something that like their plot line is kind of there's something in it that does kind of impact time, but it's not like smash you over the head time travel.
No, it's not time travel in the sense of like a time travel movie like a Back to the Future, but there is like basically there's a time travel element that can't be fully explained by anyone, and you're just kind of okay with it because it doesn't. Yeah, I mean it's
space.
It's space, right? There's
a temporal disturbance in the
space.
Yeah, you know, it's like one of those things where it's like, it's science, but it's like science with quotes. It's
right. It doesn't take itself too seriously, and there doesn't have to be like a whole chunk of world building around how the time travel works.
Yeah, I didn't really care.
You just need to know that there's a distortion that's traveling through space called the Nexus. And in the Nexus, time doesn't exist in the way that we understand it. And you can apparently at free will leave the Nexus and go to any point in time you so desire, which is a little magical and like whatever-y, but it works for this very long and very good episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation.
So that was another point that I was going to make too. Was that it definitely seemed like an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, but like much longer, much more robust, and that's
some of the criticism that the critics had when it came out, is that, hey, this isn't like a Star Trek movie. This is just an excuse to have a really long episode of The Next Generation, and sort of handing off the baton from the original series crew from the movies into The Next Generation. But I think the fans were kind of okay with that, because I loved it, and I'm sure all other fans loved it. So if critics and diehard, it's like, I feel like it was accessible enough that if you'd never seen Star Trek before and your boyfriend or girlfriend drug you to the movie, you could still be like, all right, that's a decent movie. But really, if you're the Next Generation fan, you probably enjoyed it.
I've always had a problem with that, like that line of criticism, because when you have a television property and then you take it and you make a movie out of it, like, who are you planning on seeing this movie?
Right.
Like, you're planning on fans of this show to go see the movie. So I never agree with that argument. I feel like, yeah, you should make a 2-hour long episode of the show, and you should do it with a bigger budget.
Yeah.
And that way I'll go and see it, and I'll be super happy that I saw it.
And it comes as no surprise, because the producer of the movie was Rick Berman, who was the executive producer of the show. So, of course, it's going to have a similar flair and feel to it. And I don't think that any fans were disappointed by that. And also, it's like, I looked this up online because I was curious, because I was interested to know what the budget was for Blade Runner and how much money it made. And I wanted to compare the two, because Star Trek Generations, it did well in the theaters, but it was kind of bumped off and on, and it came out around the same time as Stargate, which was very popular and did incredibly well and made more money.
But you said I didn't see that movie.
Yeah, I didn't see that movie because I had a grudge. I was like, how dare you come out at the same time as my beloved. So I still need to see Stargate, which, I'm 30-something years old. I'm over it now. Honestly, I really need to watch it.
I'll spare you. It's all right. I mean, it's not terrible.
From what I know of it, it's like Egyptians came and made everything and then fucked off.
In the most vaguest sense of the term.
Yeah.
There's so much more.
Well, then I need to watch it then. I need to watch the movie.
Yeah, but you don't need to.
It's James Spader.
Yeah, it's true, but you don't need to. Like, it's good, but it's not like, oh my god, your life is going to change after.
So, like, if I get in a car accident and break my legs and I'm, like, bound to a bed and I've got some free time, I should see it. You should see it. But I shouldn't go out of my ways.
But we have, like, a whole wall of movies there.
It's true. It's a lot of movies over there you guys can't see.
I feel all are worth seeing. But Stargate's not on that wall. So, it's not to say Stargate's not worth seeing, it's just not... I feel you. But anyway, as I was saying, the budget for this movie was $35 million. Would you like to guess how much money it made globally? With the Star Trek movie?
The Star Trek movie.
I'm going to say $100 million.
$118 million.
That's
so they made their money back for sure. Yeah. Several times over. So fuck the critics.
But that doesn't take into account their marketing.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't take into account... Funny you should bring up their marketing. Fun fact about Star Trek Generations. So I mentioned it came out in 1994. Would you believe that it was the first movie ever made to have its own website?
Really?
Yeah.
No, I would not.
It was the first movie to ever have its own website as part of its marketing campaign. So that's pretty cool.
It's good that you did all this research.
Yeah, I was a little bored today, so I was like, I'm going to look up some stuff.
I like that you did it.
Yeah, some trivia. So anyway, like, overall, what were your impressions of the movie? Parts you liked, parts you didn't like, characters, whatever.
Okay, so first and foremost, I'm going to say this. I didn't realize how much I like Captain Kirk.
Yeah. Would you call them cigarette muscles?
Yeah. Whiskey and cigarette muscles.
Yeah.
No, because, like, they don't really make men like that, like in the 60s and before that, like men looked differently than like Hollywood actors look today.
It's true.
Today Hollywood actors are like variations on Dwayne The Rock Johnson.
Or Chris Evans.
Right. But like,
Right.
I think even Chris Evans is like a variation on The Rock.
It's like, how much baked chicken can we make you eat
Right.
to get your muscles to look that way?
The Rock has basically created a format for the Hollywood actor, and I feel like it actually started probably with Arnold Schwarzenegger, but like The Rock has taken it and made his own, right? I honestly think he's like the definition of what you think like Hollywood actor. Right?
Hollywood actor, Hollywood male, you know, leading male.
It doesn't
action.
matter what size of a human you are. We're all not his size, but like you have to be as ripped as him. In your frame, you have to just be like the perfect male. Like
look at Chris Pratt.
Right.
He had to get ripped for all of his movies.
Right.
Like,
And here's the best part about it, like Chris Pratt, like he has his shirt off for like 45 seconds in Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah.
So he did all of that work for what? Like, and honestly, it wasn't even a scene that added to the movie.
Yeah.
Like, it could have just not have been in there because he wears a costume the whole time. But like, that's what you have to look like.
Well,
but
I'm just gonna say I think it was worth it.
but I think like from the 70s, late 70s, and before.
Yeah.
Your men were kind of like these barrel-chested, like they didn't work out. They just like lifted heavy things.
They just lifted heavy things. They walked. They smoked.
Right.
Maybe they rode a bike every once in a while.
They would just like haymaker somebody, and that was like their physical regimen, right?
Yeah. Well, it's true. Like Google it. Look at a still of Leonard Nimoy and why can I not think of anyone's name anymore? William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy and William Shatner. Look at a still of them in their Star Trek uniforms. There's just these barrel-chested, thin, kind of lean men.
Right.
This was like before high fructose corn syrup and before everyone gave up smoking. Right. That's just what men looked like.
If you had to go on a diet, you would switch from scotch to vodka, right? You might have some gin for a little bit of flavor.
You might have a couple extra cigarettes,
right? But
as an appetite suppressant.
That's how they looked, and there's something I think that is really different about those men that have like gotten older, but like they're still like William Shatner. To me, like it's weird that he still looks as young as he looks because he's ancient.
Well, yeah. In '94, he's old as dirt now. In '94, he was not a young man. I mean, he was probably in his late 50s, early 60s.
Yeah, but even still, I was like, oh man, that's Captain Kirk.
Yeah, that's Captain Kirk.
Like in the film, when people looked to him for like his leadership, you were like, oh yeah, that's the and I'm like getting into that vibe for no reason. I'm not like the Star Trek guy, but like even someone who's like only adjacent to fandom was like, yeah, like Captain Kirk, he's gonna save the day. But you're like, a part of my brain is going, there's no way this old fucking dude is like hurling himself down like ladders and sealing doors and punching anybody. But
it's the future. Healthcare's different.
Right. But, I got behind it. And the spoiler alert is he has to save the ship from this time.
Yeah, the Nexus.
Yeah. And like a hole is ripped open and we are all led to believe that Captain Kirk is dead.
Yeah, holes ripped through the ship, and he's been sucked into space.
Right, and this is within like the first 10 minutes of the movie. Very short period of time.
It's 78 years before present day. Right. I'm using bunny ears of the Next Generation, which I can't remember the century, the date. I'm a bad Trekkie.
So I'm watching, and I'm like, okay, so Captain Kirk is dead. Like, obviously Captain Kirk's not dead. Like, you're not going to kill Captain Kirk. So who knows what happened to him? Right. It's not a big stretch as we jump forward 78 years to think, oh, well, maybe he's here somewhere.
Right.
That's not the case. We find out later, some variations, some of the story. Like we find out what's going on with this next
there's
story.
very much like if you know about like multiverses and string theory and all that, it's like you could kind of like suspend disbelief, and if you don't, you could still suspend disbelief because it's got Captain Kirk and Captain Picard in it. It's awesome.
Right, and so we start to we kind of like come in and the cast or the crew of the Next Generation are on this
Enterprise D.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
There also, you told me about this alien race, right? Like there's an alien race that we're introduced to before.
Yeah,
we jump
well,
ahead.
so you're introduced to them in the Next Generation, but it's the Alorans, which are what Guinan is, so Whoopi Goldberg's character, and they're a race of humanoids, and what kind of makes them strange, or what makes them unique, is that they live for a very, very long time. And they don't age like a human would, right? They live for a very long time. And also, they're not like betazoids or betazoids where they can they have psychic abilities and have telepathy, but they have this like unique insight, and they never get into what the science of that is, whether there's something neurological going on where they can kind of read people's minds and emotions, but they're called the race of listeners. And I think that it's just they have a highly developed ability to read body language and subtlety that's part of their communication as a species. And so they tend to be very good counselors, very good listeners, hence Guinan's character, who is like the bartender, like, oh, you're having troubles, go down to
That's Whoopi Goldberg.
Yeah, Whoopi Goldberg, go down to 10 Forward, and Guinan will have some like wisdom to give you, right? She's like, your friendly ear at the bar.
So is she like a regular in the Next Generation show?
Yeah, she's a regular. So she's like, she guest stars in every season. She's a really important character in the Next Generation. In fact, I think Whoopi Goldberg won like I don't know. I would have to look it up I think she won a bunch of Emmys for her role as Guinan in the show. But anyway, so that race of people was almost completely wiped out of the universe because, and you find this out in the TV show, and they allude to it in the movie, but you have to kind of know what they're talking about. Their whole race was their whole planet and their star system was destroyed by the Borg. So the Borg was creeping around the edge of the galaxy, kind of at the very beginning of the Next Generation. And they didn't show up in the series until a couple seasons in. But essentially what the Borg do is they find civilizations, they assimilate those civilizations, and they turn those groups of people into Borg. And then they acquire the knowledge and the technology of those civilizations into the Borg continuum, or the Borg like consciousness, and that's how they grow. That's like where we get things like resistance is futile, and you will be assimilated.
Yeah, I've seen that movie.
Yeah,
I don't remember what it's called, but
Star Trek First Contact, arguably a much, much better action movie. It's delightful. I love it. You get to see like cool badass Picard come out. It's a little less cerebral than your other Star Trek movies, but it's probably one of my favorite. Anyway, as I was saying, so Guinan's people are just completely obliterated, and there's a refugee ship that's being transported back to Earth. Well, on their way back to Earth, they get caught up in this like time ribbon, this disturbance, the Nexus, and essentially it's like an energy disturbance, right? And it can rip apart ships, and they get kind of caught in its like they get sucked into it, and it can destroy ships. But before the ships are destroyed, people start phasing in and out of this reality into an alternate reality, and you get led to believe that the Nexus is almost like heaven. Like Guinan describes it as like pure joy, and that we were ripped away from it. So she was on this refugee ship that was being rescued by Enterprise B, which Captain Kirk was on, as like it was just supposed to go out for a quick run around the block from space dock. So it wasn't supposed to really, and it wasn't fully functional. That's another plot point, is that it was missing a bunch of parts and pieces. It was more just like a tour of like, hey, we've got the new Enterprise B, we're going to go on a quick tour out to Pluto and then back to Earth into space dock. And while they're out, they intercept this distress call, and it's the refugees from the Guinan's planet, and she's on board, and so is the main villain of the movie, Soren, Dr. Tolian Soren, and they're both ripped away from the Nexus. And like, imagine, this is what I would imagine it to be like. Like, imagine when you're a little kid and your mom, like, shakes you to get out of bed and go to school in the morning, and, like, oh, you were having, like, the best dream, and you don't want to get out of your warm bed, and your mom's, like, like, being a total jerk and trying to get you out of bed to go to school in the morning. That's probably, like, one iota of what it was like to be ripped away from the Nexus. So anyway, 78 years later, Guinan's on the Enterprise, and there's like some interesting things that happen, and she runs back into Dr. Tolian Soren.
Okay, so that's the villain's name.
Yeah,
right? Okay.
Who Malcolm McDowell plays.
Yeah, because I'm not, honestly, like, the names escape me. I have no capacity for recalling those.
Sorry.
No, it's I've
had many years to digest it.
So basically, what we learn is there's this plan.
Yeah.
This very sort of elaborate plan involving like shooting a rocket into a sun and like basically this guy. I'll spare you the long drawn out details.
Yeah.
But basically, this guy wants to get back in.
He wants to get back into the Nexus, and he knows that if he just flies into it with a ship, there's a good chance he could just die and not be able to get back in, right? But he has the plan is that if he can alter the gravitational pull through the solar system by destroying stars here and there, he can distort or he can change the course of this time ribbon so that it passes through a planet, and he has the coordinates just right, like he's done the math just right, so that he can be like on the planet at the point of a planet, an M-class planet that's habitable for humanoids, as the ribbon passes through it, and it'll kind of take him up, and that way he won't have to risk being exploded in a ship by flying into it. So that's kind of like, it's really bad news though, because if he destroys the star, he's going to destroy other planets in the solar system that have people like primitive civilizations on them. So he'll kill millions of people to do this.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, that's basically the plot.
Yeah.
It's a little convoluted.
Right. And then it turns out that, Captain Kirk is in the Nexus. He didn't really die, and that's how Kirk gets back into the fold. Yeah.
So, I will say my one criticism of it was that the story was a little convoluted. However,
yeah, you had to pay attention.
It didn't bother me. I found it pretty enjoyable, actually. The one thing that I do want to give some heavy criticism to is Data.
Okay, I'll take it.
Yeah, one of the side plot points is that Data is given a chip. And
it's his emotion chip.
Right, it is a chip that causes him to feel human emotions.
Enables him to feel human emotions.
Okay. Enables him when he puts it into his head,
his positronic relay.
Okay, yeah. When he puts it in his fucking head, he can feel fucking emotions, and he does so in such a way that I find incredibly annoying.
Yeah, it's super annoying.
I was like, oh, this is how long is this going to go on for?
Yeah.
The like incessant laughing. Yeah. I was just like, what is happening here?
To be fair, I think Jordy was just as annoyed as you were.
Yeah, no, that's like the only thing. It wasn't like, oh god, this movie needs to be turned off, but it was like, it needed to be noted. Yeah. My other criticism is, it's actually nothing against this movie per se, but I felt like I was a little honey-dicked when they killed off. When they killed off the captain.
Yeah, Captain Kirk.
When they killed off Captain Kirk the first time, I was like, they're not going to kill him off. Like, it's Captain Kirk. Like, how are they going to kill him off? And then they didn't. And I was like, oh, sweet. Yeah. They didn't kill him off. He's back. And then he fucking died.
Yeah. He died so hard.
But then I was like, wait, are they going to bring him back again? And they don't.
Nope.
And they
that's it. William Shatner was like, I'm out.
They just like,
I made my money.
Yeah, it was like, that's how he goes?
That's how he goes.
What the fuck?
He went the first time, supposedly saving the Enterprise B. He went the second time, saving millions of lives.
If he's going to get that old, like to me, there's like an age. I would say it's like around 60. Right? If you're around 60...
That's not that old.
Like, no, but like in like Captain Warrior space traveler terms, it's pretty old, right? So like if you get to 60, or even retirement age, you get to 65. But I'm going to say Warriors get an earlier retirement age. Yeah. I'm going to take a stand for Warriors all over.
No, yeah, every Klingon would agree with you. No Klingon wants to live to be an old man.
You should be able to retire in the alternate timeline where you chop wood.
Yeah, for sure. Like, he was in the Nexus, and he was like, I got my girl inside. I'm chopping wood like a manly man. I'm about to go inside and make this bitch some eggs.
Instead,
and then he's like, all right.
On a shitty rock planet.
He died on a shitty rock planet. But you know what? He was like, but did you get it that he realized while he was in the Nexus and Picard was trying to convince him to come back and help him to save all these people, he was like, oh, none of this is real. Like, I can tell there's no risk involved. I know that no matter what I do, it's going to work out. Like, this is like paradise.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I might as well go back and help you because it's going to be more fun and interesting than having my way and always succeeding.
I should totally take my geriatric broke down ass out of paradise,
out of heaven,
a living heaven, and go down to shitty rock planet and die when old steel bridges fall on my head.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Someone has. Let's just say Malcolm McDowell's a badass, and it took more than one captain to bring him down.
That was funny too.
Yeah.
Yeah. When they're both fighting him.
Right.
But yeah, I just I was saddened because it was like, that's it. That's a very ignoble way to end 30 or 40 years worth of that character.
I mean, agree to disagree. I think it's a pretty badass epic ending.
Yeah, well, there is always time travel.
Spock had a similar ending in the alternate
Spock's
timeline.
Spock's a supporting character. Fuck Spock. I'm taking a stand here.
No, you don't know shit.
No, I don't.
You're an uneducated child. Mm-hmm. You don't know what you're talking
he's a
about.
Supporting character. Is he captain? Is he Captain Kirk?
He's an ambassador.
Oh, well, ambassadors are supporting cast. They can kiss my butt.
Fuck you. Oh, you're just like inciting more Star Trek on yourself. Like you're
bringing it down.
You're just bringing it down. Like you're just digging your hole deeper. Like now I have so much more Star Trek you have to watch.
Well, I just feel like if anything.
But you know who would agree with you? Bones.
Bones?
Yeah, Dr. McCoy would agree with you. Because he always kind of had he was always like frustrated and annoyed by Spock. Like, damn it, Spock!
Well, I don't have any problems with Spock specifically, but Spock is there to support the main character, which is Kirk. The show.
I see what you're saying,
Captain Kirk,
but you're using some strong fighting words by saying fuck Spock.
Just like Picard. Picard is the hero. Fuck
Riker. Yeah, fuck Riker.
Him.
Yeah, fuck Riker. Yeah.
Fuck Data. He's a fucking robot.
Yeah.
He's nobody. We can replace him with 2 robots.
No. You know who? Okay, I could say fuck that, but not Geordi. That ship don't run without Geordi, and not Worf, because shit doesn't get done without Worf. Listen, child. Listen, son. Listen, you little boy. You don't know what you're talking about.
No.
Picard, Geordi, and Worf make that show and run that ship.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But all of them could die but Picard. That's why there are shows and episodes that are about Picard and Picard's struggle.
That's why Picard's getting his brand new series.
Right, because
which is like
Geordi can go and take his ass back to reading Rainbow with his stupid fucking visor. He's a cool character.
You know how Geordi got his visor? You know how that came about?
I figure so. Here's how I thought that it happened.
Yeah, tell me.
I always thought it was like a hair, like one of those back in the remember in the late 80s and early 90s
hair bands?
They had like those stupid hair bands with like all the teeth.
Yep.
We always used to run around and pretend to be him when we were kids using those. So I always assumed like they were like we don't know what to do to give him a visor, and so they gave him one of those and like painted it up.
That is exactly what happened. So one of I think it was an art director or maybe one of the producers, his daughter was like playing and her like headband fell over her eyes, and he's like, that's what we do. We get a headband, we spray paint it gold. That's how Geordi can see.
Somebody get me cocaine.
So quick, it's 1987. This is how we talk. All right, so I would never expect it to mean as much to you as it does to me. It's very much a nostalgic movie. I recognize it's not the best Star Trek movie ever made. I recognize it's not the best movie ever made, but it's like always going to have a place in my heart. But would you watch it again? Would you recommend it to others?
So here's the thing. If you like Star Trek, you should see it.
Yeah.
If you're into sci-fi movies, you should see it. It was also really cool. There's a scene in it where the Enterprise crash lands into a planet.
That's pretty cool.
And to me, like, that was pretty badass for the time. Like, it looked really fucking good.
Yeah, for 1994, it was like Jurassic Park good.
Does it hold up? I don't know, but it is done with traditional special effects. It's not CGI, so it's like...
Yeah, I think it's all models,
It looks a lot more real. It just looked cool. And I was like, wow, that's crazy that they'd have... and also it gives you like just an indication of the sheer scope of how big those ships are.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it was a good movie. I really enjoyed seeing it. I would definitely watch it again. And I'm not that big into Star Trek, but yeah, I mean, I kind of want to be.
Yeah, so the last thing I'll say about it is some of my favorite lines from like movies that I remember are from that movie, and they're all Dr. Tolian Soren lines because they just make you think. So one of my favorites is "Time is the fire in which we burn," and "Time is a predator." You know, like no matter how, and it's just like it's very like I don't know, like it's just kind of cool and dark.
It's interesting. It's an interesting take on time travel without being too like multiversey, time travel-y. It's kind of like you can jump in and you can jump out, but like So I liked it. I didn't think it was overly complex. I think it's an easy plot to follow, and it was cool. I thought it was a good movie. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. Well, good. So it's got the Nathan seal of approval as I'd have it on in the background while I'm cleaning house.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about Blade Runner.
Oh my God, Blade Runner.
Blade Runner from 1982.
Oh, 1980s, old school, original Blade Runner, 1982. So I had seen Blade Runner 2049 two times.
Yeah.
And I had never seen the original Blade Runner. And as always happens when we're discussing things, this was how the conversation was like, oh yeah, you're Blade Runner 2049, blah. Well, like in the original, oh, I've never seen the original. I can't believe you've never seen the original Blade Runner. You gotta watch the original Blade Runner.
Is that how I sound?
Yeah, well, like...
is that the mockery I make
But I feel like that's the same way I sound when I was like, oh, I can't believe you've never seen Star Trek. Oh, you gotta watch this episode. Oh, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. You like vampires, but you're too cool for Buffy. Like, that's my impression of us being like jerks to the other one because life happens and we don't have time to consume all the media.
Yeah, no. And also, like, certain things interest people more than others, right? Like, so... Star Trek.
Yeah, I like good stuff. Yeah.
Oh.
I'm just kidding.
I quit. No, I'm kidding. No, but like, I just from a sci-fi perspective, like, Star Trek is very like it's kind of far future space travel. It's very sci-fi. This is a very sci-fi movie too, but in a totally different
way. Yeah.
It is I guess what some people would call like cyberpunk.
It's like kind of dystopian.
I consider it like a neo-noir. It's
I would agree. I don't think it's cyberpunk. Because when I think cyberpunk, I think like Neuromancer, even like cyberpunk fashion. It's very like neon and flashy colors and it's it's like it's steam. You know what cyberpunk is. I don't need to explain to you people, but
I think that it is and it isn't. And what I mean by that is like it is the setting and the world in which cyberpunk dwells.
Right.
But I feel like it's actually much grittier and dirtier and dingier
than
cyberpunk.
I agree. There's like a dystopian, like almost post-apocalyptic edge to the fashion.
It is, yeah. So cyberpunk dwells in this world, right? But we don't really get an indication of what cyberpunk is. It's like this first and foremost, this is a Philip K. Dick story. So a lot of Philip K. Dick stories are like kind of head trip, futuristic head trip stories.
Did you ever read that short?
Android's Dream of Electric Sheep. I actually haven't read it.
Okay.
So I don't know it.
We should read it.
I've read. We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. I'm in the process of reading A Scanner Darkly right now. So like I've read a decent amount, but this one I haven't. I don't own the book. I've never been able to pick it up. I just never got to it.
Is it a short story or is it a full book?
I think all of Dick's stories, even like his novels, are kind of short.
Okay.
So it's definitely not a Stephen King. It's a Philip K. Dick.
We'll have to keep our eyes peeled. Yeah. Maybe at the really good half-price books we'll go to. Okay, can we just pause for a second?
Yeah.
Like, we hit the mother lode of World of Darkness books at half-price books recently.
Yeah.
Like, we walked in... we went specifically because I didn't have a copy of Star Trek Generations, and I was like, okay, let's go, like, just real quick. They'll probably have a copy, I hope. Ooh, maybe. And there's a couple that are near us, and there's one we hadn't been to in a long, long time. It's actually one I used to work at. And... you'd only ever been there one time with me last year, about a year ago. And we went in just looking for this DVD, and it's like, I'm going to go to the RPG book section and just see what's up. And like, it was almost 3 whole shelves of like World of Darkness, White Wolf stuff, Old World of Darkness, New World of Darkness, Dark Ages, second edition, revised. There's so many books. We left with many, but we had to return some because Nate got overzealous and bought a bunch he already had.
It turns out when you don't have a list, you don't necessarily remember every detail of what's in your collection. So
Especially when you have lots and lots of books like this guy.
There's a lot of books where I thought that I didn't have them, or I had them in my collection already, and I got home and I was like, oh, half of these books I already own. I just kind of I greedily just tried to chew them all up. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I ended up taking a bunch of them back. But
anyway, it was a super successful trip to Half Price Books because we got a copy of Star Trek, but we also got a bunch of cool books that he wanted for his collection. Anyway, I interrupt you because I got excited about bookstores and looking for. Well, you were looking. We're going to keep our eyes out for Philip K. Dick. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
So. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Blade Runner, it does take place in a near future, and they explain to you also.
It actually takes place.
Go ahead.
Right now.
Right. It takes place. It takes place in 2019.
Yeah.
So that's appropriate. Mm-hmm. So, anyways, real quick, this movie, the one that we watched the director's cut. This movie has 5 or more different versions.
I feel like I just read today on Wikipedia, which could totally be false. I feel like maybe there are 7 versions.
So there's a lot of versions.
A lot of versions.
I have Wikipedia up here on my phone, but I didn't look to see how many there
It's buried
were.
in there. I wouldn't waste time looking for it. But
yeah, so there is 7 versions of Blade Runner exist. Mm-hmm. The director's cut was released in 92. Which is the one that we looked at. Mm-hmm. Then in 2007, Warner Brothers released the final cut, a 25th anniversary.
Okay, Warner Brothers. Right. Yeah.
The only version over which Scott retained artistic control. So I don't know I don't know how deeply he was involved, but
Ridley Scott, the director.
Yeah. So Ridley Scott, the movie was released, and I believe the original theatrical version. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm going off of memory, but I believe the original theatrical cut of this movie had a voiceover. Harrison Ford does a voiceover. So it's made incredibly noir.
Right.
Because it's got a voiceover. But I don't believe that Ridley Scott wanted that. And I think that the director's cut version that we have, it obviously doesn't have the voiceover. So it's left for you to sort of watch and let the film inform your opinion of what's happening.
Right.
So, basic premise is Harrison Ford plays Deckard. Deckard is a burned-out cop, also known as a Blade Runner, and a Blade Runner's job is to retire these androids, these replicants.
Yeah.
And so replicants are not permitted on Earth.
Right.
Because they look like humans, and I guess they're better than us. So I'm not firm in my understanding as to why they're not permitted, but basically they're slaves.
They're genetically designed to be slaves, to have limited capacity for emotion, to only live for 4 years.
And since
they're stronger than us.
Right.
Physically they're stronger than us.
They can withstand, temperatures. They can, they're designed for work. Mm-hmm. And because after a certain period of time, they may start to develop emotions and become angry about their enslavement.
Right.
They're given a limited lifespan.
Right.
And that limited lifespan is 4 years. And so basically the premise of the film is a group of these androids, these replicants, escape, and they make their way back to Earth to try to, what it seems like, to try to figure out how to get
to try and find their maker so that he can allow them to live longer, to fix them, right? So that's the basic premise, and Deckard is charged with destroying them,
right?
Because that's his job.
Because he's the best.
He's the best. He's the best one there is.
Yeah.
So anyway, anything else you want to kind of say about the movie before I get into thoughts, feelings?
Yeah. So there is a common thread in the community, the Blade Runner fan community, of people that believe that Deckard is a replicant, and that believe that he is not a replicant. And they believe there are certain little Easter eggs that prove one way or the other. So that's something. So now the story that we've told is way super basic. It like doesn't go into any of the nuance of this movie. Mm-mm. So I just want to get like your perspective, like having not seen it before, having seen 2049. What is your opinion on this movie, just on a whole?
Right. Well, before I get into that, I have to say that 2049 is an amazing movie that stands on its own totally, because I could have only seen that movie and been like, okay, I understand everything that's happening. So Ridley Scott and everybody involved in that movie, all the actors, the writers, everybody did a fantastic job of creating a beautiful piece of film that could stand on its own. You don't need to know the whole backstory of Blade Runner to really appreciate Blade Runner 2049. So, if you are a very visual person or a very like auditory person, and you haven't seen Blade Runner 2049, grab some snacks and sit down and watch it, because it's a beautiful movie, and it's long and it takes its time, but it's incredible to listen to, and it's visually it's stunning. I was really looking forward to watching the original when Nate had suggested it, because I knew that there were pieces that it would allow me to have a deeper appreciation of Blade Runner 2049, and I already really liked it. The first thing I'll say about this movie is that it was made in 1982, but it's all absolutely visually stunning. It totally holds up. I love the aesthetic of these two movies. It's not quite dystopian, right? It's not quite post-apocalyptic, but it's got a gritty edge to it that you really believe, man, like 10, 20, 15 more years, somewhere in there, if things keep going the way they're going with technology and with climate change and everything, like you could really see the world looking and feeling this way. Another thing that I love about this movie, both of them, but the older one especially, is that, is the fashion. So a lot of times when you watch sci-fi movies that take place in any given or that were made in any given decade, the style of the clothes that the characters wear, regardless of whether it takes place in the future, the past, or the present, are very much of that time, right? So, for example, Star Trek. Movies that were made in the 70s, the uniforms kind of have a 70s feel to them. 80s kind of have an 80s feel to them, and so on and so forth. Another movie that was made in the 80s but was supposed to take place well into the future was Total Recall. You watch Total Recall, and the fashion is very like... It looks like 80s fashion that was trying to be futuristic.
Also another Philip K. Dick story.
Yeah, okay, great tie-in. But you watch Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049... And even though they take place like 40 or 20 years apart, 30 years apart, sorry, math is hard, there's still, it's a believable continuum that's how people dressed and that's how people looked and carried themselves, that's what life looked like, that's what how technology evolved very rapidly. Mm-hmm. So those threads are really well tied in. And I don't mean to wax poetic about 2049, but it's pretty impressive how they did that. But just going back to Blade Runner, the 1982 version, I love the fashion in it because it doesn't look like it's 1980s fashion trying to be futuristic. It looks wholly unique and all its own. So everything from Decker's jacket to the outfits the replicants were wearing, to sort of what street fashion looked like, to what the clothes that the vendors who were in like sort of the genetics bazaar area, the street vendors were wearing, to the other cops. Like everything was believable, and it pulled you into that world and made it that much more immersive. It wasn't like, oh yeah, that's Harrison Ford wearing some like funky jacket that, someone in 1982 would have designed to look futuristic. So I don't know, like maybe I have like an eye for this type of fashion, or it really appeals to me, but I loved it. It was gritty and futuristic, but it had enough of like sort of an old school 1920s, 1930s tie-in, and in the way that the Rachel character, the replicant that he kind of falls in love with, the way she did her hair, her dress, like it was an old enough throwback. It had just a little bit of 1980s in it, but you could totally believe that it's something that people would wear in the future, even though the future set is now, right? So I love that. And if neither of those movies got any nods at the Oscars or awards for fashion or costume design,
or for music,
yeah, it's a shame, right?
So yeah, that's the other thing too. Like 2049 is kind of like the modern day. I think it was a really like amazing sequel to this movie.
Perfect sequel. Perfect sequel.
And I think that even though it's a different group of individuals doing the music, like even the music.
So was it Vangelis? Vangelis, I think, was the composer. I'm not sure
if it's like Vangelis or Vangelis.
Vangelis or Vangelis. Yeah. I have it written down, but I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Did the music for the original. Yeah, and then whoever kind of took up
the Hans Zimmer, and then I think there was some other.
Oh, that makes sense if it was Hans Zimmer.
But like the soundtrack for 2049, I know that's not what we're talking about, but like.
You can't really talk about one without talking about the other, though.
Here's the thing. If you listen to this podcast and you are like a gamer, a tabletop gamer, or a tabletop game master, more importantly, these are two soundtracks you need for your game. And it doesn't matter what type of game that you're running. If you want to emphasize tension and creepiness and just like raise the heckles and the hairs on the back of people's necks, like these soundtracks... Especially this Vangelis one. Yeah. Like, you need to get that.
Yeah, if you're playing Shadowrun or V5, these would be great background music.
Any horror or, like, near future, cyberpunk, Shadowrun. I think even, like, a D&D game, if you have, like, a tense dungeon, like, it's just, you know, if somewhere where you're, like, trying to take them through, like, an alien kind of thinking, like, an oddity. Like, I think that these soundtracks work great.
Right.
I got home from 2049 and bought the soundtrack. That's like how into this movie I was.
We saw it together. So I saw 2049 with a group of friends, and then I think later the next day I was going up to see you in Chicago, and I was like, all right, I don't care what we do, but we have to go see Blade Runner 2049 right now. And you're like, okay, I'm into it. Because I didn't know you. I knew you, but I didn't know that you were like a big fan of the original. Mm-hmm. But I knew you well enough to know that regardless, you would love this movie. So anyway, let me get back into Blade Runner. I loved it. I loved it. I'm so glad we watched it. I thought the version that we saw was fine. I wouldn't, I don't think I needed more. I definitely, wouldn't have wanted any less in there. There were a couple things that I did find confusing. And I think a lot of that is... perhaps translation from story to movie. Okay. Like, for example, there was one character who, Edward James Olmos' character, he plays a character named Gaff. Mm-hmm. And I didn't understand the point of him at all. Like, he's one of the detectives who's like, hey, Decker, you need to come back and find these replicants. And he's kind of goes with them on some sleuthing missions, and he's around, but he doesn't really seem like he serves a large purpose.
Yeah, so there's some interesting relatable tales about him. One, from just a casual observer, like someone who's not buying into theories about the movie, first and foremost, he's injured, right?
Yeah, he has like something's wrong with his leg.
Right.
Yeah.
So he, from my understanding, he is also a Blade Runner.
Yeah.
And
not retired.
Right. Not a retired Blade Runner, but he's injured, so he's like not physically capable of doing the things that Deckard is doing. And so basically, what I got out of it was he's the driver. Like, Deckard doesn't really fly the car at all. So I feel like he's kind of like the liaison. Like, Deckard is asked to come back, but Edward James Olmos' character is sort of like the liaison between him and the police department.
Oh, okay. Now, so he's kind of like watching him to make sure he does his job.
Right.
Gotcha.
So there's another theory. And that theory is that Deckard is a replicant.
Yeah.
Deckard is an experimental replicant designed to hunt down and kill other replicants. And that's why
see Blade Runner 2049.
Right. And so his character would be, again, the liaison between the Blade, like him being a replicant and humanity.
Right.
And,
okay.
And the theory is bolstered by his ability to know what Deckard was thinking with the unicorn.
Oh, okay.
Remember, there's a scene in the middle of the movie where Deckard falls asleep and he has a dream about a unicorn.
Right.
And then when Deckard flees with Rachel,
right,
there's the origami unicorn.
Right.
And he does the origami. So, like,
yeah.
he knows. And, like, so... I don't know. Also,
I kind of feel like I need to watch it again because I did see it all.
You should probably watch it like 12 more times.
Yeah, it's a movie that you got to watch and watch and watch to really, I think, get a lot of these nuances. Okay, so that kind of makes sense. Then I can see that because my thinking was like, who is this guy? Why does he matter? Why is he even there? Like I was like, is this just like a character from the book or from the story?
Have you ever seen Chinatown with Jack Nicholson?
No.
Okay, so Chinatown with Jack Nicholson.
This might be a new episode.
This is another noir film, right? This is a
yeah.
very popular noir film where Jack Nicholson plays a detective and he's like hunting all this stuff down. Well, he has a partner that like doesn't really matter at all and doesn't really factor in, but like is in the end of the movie. So it's kind of like, I feel like from a detective story, it's kind of just the character that needed to be there to like say that line, like,
oh, I see,
like in Chinatown, like that character's always like, you know, it's only Chinatown, Jake, like, you know, it's kind of like that noir thing where it's like, you know, it's too bad she won't live.
Yeah, that's Gaff's line. It's too bad she won't live because Deckard falls in love with Rachel, who's a replicant who will die after like 4 years or a couple more years, right? Supposedly.
Right, supposedly. But so I think that he's there, one, to show kind of like a piece of the world. He's like a gritty piece of the world.
Right.
Because he like speaks English, but he doesn't. He speaks city speak. He speaks like a combination of like Chinese, Japanese.
Yeah, that's the other cool thing where I could really see how, like, obviously, you know, I've heard it over and over and over again, but Blade Runner influenced so many sci-fi movies and TV shows and stories that came after it. Anime and everything. And, like, I could definitely see, like, you remember how, like, in Firefly and Serenity, there's, like, everyone's speaking, like, a mix of English and Chinese.
Right.
I was like, oh, that's... Yeah, you could like extrapolate that like our future on Earth, like China and the U.S. or English and Chinese would be the two main languages. But it's like Blade Runner did it first.
Well, I'm also convinced that Firefly takes place in the same world because we already know
Weyland-Yutani.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
because we already know that Weyland-Yutani is the tie that binds Blade Runner to the alien world.
Yeah,
and they're like. They're related, but I believe that they're the same world.
Okay.
And then, like, we've seen the Weyland-Yutani logo in Firefly.
Yeah.
So
it's like an Easter egg someone put in.
Right. So I firmly believe that they're all sort of interconnected. Whether they're actually interconnected or not doesn't really matter. But that was kind of like where I was like, oh shit, I got to watch this show now. Like,
yeah. Yeah. So I loved it. I highly recommend it to everyone, and it's definitely not the last time I'll watch it, and I'll probably watch 2049 again soon so that I can be like, oh, now I get this point, and like, you know, you'll realize things that you didn't even know you were missing out on.
Right. I made it a point to just not talk and kind of like let you watch because there are these like fan theories that are up and down, and I was like, well, I don't even know if those are things she'll pick up on, and honestly I don't want to like pepper your perspective on it.
Yeah.
But now that you've seen it, you know, I feel a little bit more...
You know, yeah, you really held back because I did not when we were watching Star Trek. I was like, oh, that's this, that's this, because, you know, it helps with context. But I think the only other kind of notes I had from it, and like I said, I looked up how much money it made because what I had heard, just, you know, through consuming media, was that Blade Runner was a cult movie and didn't do well right at the time it came out, but then it was like so beloved that everyone, you know, like people who understood that it was good and understood what Ridley Scott was trying to do were like, this is magical and this is amazing. But just to kind of show, like, it didn't do well. The budget for this movie was $28 million and it only made $33.8 million at the box office. So it only made like $5 million more than what they spent on it, so which is kind of sad.
I can say for sure, this movie came out in 82, so I didn't see it like in 82 because I was a year old.
Right.
But this is a movie that I saw on television. So I know for the first time seeing it on TV, like they must have just went, okay, it flopped, it did shit at the theater, let's just sell it to as many like different TV studios, as possible. And that's how you end up seeing stuff like this on television.
And I think people were really, really surprised it didn't do well because it had Harrison Ford, who was coming off of Star Wars. And I think the Raiders of the Lost Ark had just come out.
Yeah.
And that's why he got cast in this.
Truth be told, I feel like it is a bit highbrow. And it is a bit sci-fi, but like I think, like most people,
it's definitely highbrow. That's a great way of explaining it.
Yeah.
It's not your go in and shoot 'em up, pew pew pew, sci-fi.
So that brings me to a point that you asked me when we were watching it, and you said, "Are they doing that on purpose with her eyes?"
Oh, with the
right, because that's like one of those things that fans have latched onto.
Right.
That, like, it's obviously it must be done intentionally.
Yeah, so there's like this weird thing that happens with some of the replicants that their eyes kind of like, if you take a picture with a camera and you get that red eye thing, it's like the replicant's eyes like shine, kind of glow red the way that other people's don't. And I was like, are they doing that on purpose with her eyes? Like, is that a replicant thing?
I was very much like closed-lipped. I was like, yeah. And then she's like, what about that owl? Is that owl a replicant? And I'm like, I don't know, is it?
Yeah.
Maybe I guess it would probably have to be, right? So, yeah, it's one of those, it's a movie that is a sci-fi movie that makes you think. But if you just watched it and you were expecting like a fast-paced, beat-em-up action film, you're not going to get that. Because it is very deliberately paced.
Right.
There is a lot of like thinking and like, to me, this movie opened up that whole genre.
Right.
And
I read on IMDb that that's one of the reasons why Harrison Ford wanted to do this movie is because he was coming off of Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and he wanted to do a movie that was more of a drama, that was more serious. And Blade Runner is definitely, I would say, a drama as much as it is a sci-fi movie.
Well, I think we're going to have to wrap it up. As much as I'd like to continue to talk about Blade Runner and go into Shadowrun and Cyberpunk.
Yeah.
We're actually almost out of battery.
Oh,
so,
we better hurry it up then.
So we want to wrap it up. So what are we going to do for our next episode?
So I think for our next episode, we discussed it, and I recently, it happened kind of organically, I just finished watching Boardwalk Empire, which Nate recommended, and then he has been watching a lot of The Great British Bake Off. So I think for our next episode, we're going to talk about Boardwalk Empire and The Great British Bake Off, two very different things, but something that we both, I think, mutually enjoyed.
Yeah. So thank you guys for liking the video, for listening to the podcast, for subscribing to us if you do. And
I just want to say quick thank yous, quick shout outs. 2 people gave us awesome reviews on iTunes, Cappadocious, 1132, and Super Wheelie. Thanks so much, guys, for your reviews. It helps us out. Go check us out on iTunes.
We are modest, but we want to grow. So
Absolutely.
Please share us with your friends if you like what we talk about, if you like the subject matter. If you don't like it, tell us why and help us to improve. So, cool. Thank you, Rachel. It's always a pleasure.
It is always a pleasure.
Play Hooky, guys. Please stop squeaking.
I don't know why. I wanted to have this Thelma and Louise moment to end the podcast. All right.
Anyways,
bye, guys.
You're weird.
You're weird. Hey, folks. This is Rachel from UtilityMuffinLabs.com. If you enjoyed the Playing Hooky podcast, think about supporting us. For more podcasts, art, videos, and gaming, go to UtilityMuffinLabs.com. Follow our podcast on Twitter, @HookyPodcast, on Instagram and Facebook at our Utility Muffin Labs name, and support us on YouTube at Utility Muffin Labs. Check out our other gaming-related podcasts, 25 Years of Vampire the Masquerade and the Nerdwords podcast. Thank you all for your support. Utility Muffin Labs, consistently rated adequate.